If you've ever felt like you're doing everything right, but something still feels off, this isn't about what you're doing wrong. Being able to pause for a moment, to take a breath, and realize that not everything's your fault can feel like a real relief. For a long time, it could feel like if you just did something differently, said the right thing, handled the moment better, then maybe things would finally change. And when you start to notice how scripts are written, how expectations, roles, and pressures quietly shape behavior, there's clarity in that. But there's also something else. Because you begin to let go of the idea that everything was fully within your control. That can be uncomfortable at first. But over time, it can also feel freeing. It allows you to look at yourself more gently, to look in the mirror and say, I'm doing the best I can with what I have in the situation I'm in. You give yourself more grace, more patience, more space to adapt. Life can be exciting and exhausting at the same time, joyful and frustrating, meaningful, yet sometimes strangely empty. Most of us aren't failing. We're trying to make the best of what we've been given, while navigating a steady flow of pressures that come and go every day. We wake up knowing what needs to get done. We have routines, we have plans, we think we know how the day will go. And yet, somehow, years can pass and we quietly wonder why and for what? And when that question shows up, it's tempting to assume that something must be wrong with you, that you missed a step, didn't try hard enough, that everyone else figured out something out that you didn't. But what if that feeling isn't a personal failure? What if it's a signal that you're bumping into something like systems, expectations, and roles that were shaping you long before you ever had a chance to question them? But here's the challenge. You can feel that something's off, but you don't know where to place it. Is it me? Is it them? Is it anyone at all? And we could try to answer that, but in many cases, it's almost irrelevant. Because much of what you're reacting to is outside of your direct control. And honestly, outside of most people's control too. Most people aren't questioning narratives. They're just doing, responding, filling roles, and just keeping things moving. And because of that, a lot of life really isn't about you as an individual. It's about stability, cohesion, and keeping the group intact. Everyone stays in their role, the system survives, at least on the surface. And in many ways, that makes sense because we're human. We're wired for belonging, coordination, and stability. So when you start to see this, a fair question shows up. Doesn't this make things harder? Why would I even want to see it then? And you wouldn't be wrong at first. Awareness can feel heavy, disempowering, especially if you believe that one day, once you understood it clearly enough, you could explain it just right. And everyone else would finally get it. The thing is, though, that day usually doesn't come. And when it doesn't, awareness can turn into loneliness. But here's where something shifts, where you start to understand yourself and how you function within certain environments. You gain something quietly powerful. Not control over others, but clarity around yourself. You develop language for what you need, structure for how you operate best, awareness of what certain environments reliably produce. It's like playing a game against a computer. Once you know its patterns, you stop taking its moves personally. You anticipate, adapt, respond more intentionally, you have a higher chance of success. Life becomes less about justification and more about self-authorization. And yes, that does come with responsibility. Because once you see you can choose differently, there's no universal map for where you are to where you want to be. That space can also feel lonely. Some people retreat to old scripts because they're familiar and easier. Others become cynical and detached because losing control can feel like losing meaning. But when you understand who you are, what you need, and what environments tend to demand, you create room for something else. Compassion, clear boundaries, healthier expectations for yourself and for others. You stop organizing life around what a script requires and start navigating towards what allows you to grow. Speaking of growth, it helps understand that motivation is shaped by incentives. People are driven by different things: money, stability, approval, power, passion, belonging. But something is always pulling that behavior. And once you see that, something else becomes clear. Being smart doesn't guarantee smart decisions. Decisions are shaped by incentives, by what's rewarded, punished, and what keeps us connected to people and systems around us. Most people aren't lying to themselves. They're just responding rationally to systems that they no longer fit in where they are in life. And if we want to understand growth, it helps to look in layers. And the most important place to start is with yourself. Because that's where you do have the most influence. Each of us have preferences, obligations, fears, and they quietly shape the incentives we respond to every day. They influence the environments we choose, the roles we accept, the behaviors that we repeat. And over time, those patterns do create outcomes that feel intentional, even when they weren't consciously chosen. And this becomes especially clear in families. Most people do want strong relationships with their family. These are people that we expect to be there through everything. And yet, many people do feel forced to distance themselves or even cut contact because that relationship becomes too constrained or too painful. And that's rarely because someone is evil or uncaring. It's often because families develop an identity, a story about who we are. That story stabilizes values, roles, and expectations, who does what, who gets to change, and who doesn't. Roles form early, parents shape identity, children adapt, hierarchy emerges, usually without malicious intent. And that structure works until someone outgrows the role that they were given. And when that happens, pressure often appears to return, sometimes subtly, sometimes framed as concern or nostalgia, because growth introduces instability. We work hard to make this work. This is who we are. If you change, what does that mean for us? And again, it's not malicious. It's a system responding to a perceived threat. But the cost of stability is often placed on the person who changes. They're asked to shrink, soften, or explain, or return to a familiar version of themselves. That's where growth becomes complicated. The self and the family are just two layers. The same dynamic appears in workplaces, communities, institutions, and cultures. Anywhere that there are roles to maintain and incentives protecting stability. We'll explain these layers over time. What matters here, though, is noticing how close to home these usually are. At that point, it's easy to assign blame. It's not my fault, it's theirs. Parents, bosses, institutions, people who just don't get it. But that framing doesn't help. And it's usually not true. Most pressure doesn't come from bad people, it comes from loops, patterns that repeat because they work. not because they're good, but because they preserve stability. Parents reduce uncertainty, bosses meet targets inside systems they didn't design, institutions optimize for predictability and survival, normal people respond rationally to incentives. You zoom out far enough and you stop seeing villains. You see structure, you see loops. People aren't trying to limit each other, they're trying to just stay afloat. And when staying afloat requires maintaining roles, resisting change, or discouraging deviation, these behaviors get reinforced. Stability loops, normalization loops, role enforcement loops, incentive of compliance loops. They all follow the same logic. And once you see them, it becomes harder to hate people for participating. Not because outcomes are okay, but because behavior makes sense inside the structure that it happens in. That doesn't mean that you stay stuck. It means you stop fighting people when what you're really navigating is a system with momentum. By now, it's probably clear that many outcomes in your life aren't fully within our control. We live inside systems built on habits, incentives, and assumptions that rarely get questioned, that bring us back to stability. But here's the good news. Seeing this doesn't take agency away. It helps you place it where it belongs, not in controlling everyone, but in focusing on what you can influence. Most of the time, that's not dramatic change. It's small choices, slowing down, paying attention, being honest about what adds value and what quietly drains it. When you do that, decision-making changes. Pushback stops feeling personal. You recognize that it's a system reacting to loss predictably. And that awareness gives you options. You don't have to fight everything. You don't have to justify every choice. You don't have to force change where it isn't possible. You place energy where it matters most. In your boundaries, your relationships, the environment you stay in the ones you slowly leave. And over time, those small intentional choices create more room to grow than any single decision ever could.